Hello and welcome to Welty at Home, the slow reading virtual book club that alternates works by Eudora Welty with works by authors connected to Welty. We are currently exploring Eudora Welty's 1941 short story collection titled A Curtain of Green and Other Stories. Today, as we close out this series, we will make time to discuss the final story, A Worn Path, since we ran out of time last week, and we'll look back on the collection as a whole. I'm Jessica Russell, director of the Eudora Welty House and Garden. We are grateful to Suzanne Mars, Eudora Welty's friend and biographer, and our friend, and Professor Emerita of Millsaps College for guiding these discussions. Just some housekeeping: to comment or ask a question, click the reactions button at the bottom of your screen and select raise hand. If you're on a tablet or phone, you might have to tap that screen for that option to appear. That's how we'll know that you have a comment. And don't forget that a lively discussion often takes place in the chat, so be sure to glance over to the chat box every now and then. And that is all I have as far as introductions, except stay tuned until the end, because we always tease the next book club pick at the end of the closing series of our current club. So be sure to follow us all the way to the end. And that said, Suzanne, shall we begin today's discussion?
Let's begin, and let me first say that we have among our group the mother of the very famous Kate Medley, who was on NPR morning edition yesterday, so our weekend edition. So she was great, Jean. So I loved hearing her there. So Kate is going to be taking pictures of the Welty House for a book that Michael Pickard and I are doing. So we are honored to have NPR's featured author Kate Medley as our photographer about her new book of photographs. I've been rereading my notes on the Welty Russell letters just to see what they had to say about A Curtain of Green and the ordering of the stories. And I didn't find out too much, but let me tell you what I did find out. I did find out that on January 30th, 1941, Eudora Welty wrote to her agent, Dermot Russell, saying that she thought a few of the stories just really didn't belong in the collection. That included Why I Live at the P.O., which she had doubts about the worth of that story, Acrobats in a Park, which did get dropped and was not published, in fact, until 1977 in France, The Hitchhikers, Flowers for Marjorie, and The Whistle. But only one was dropped out. On February 10th, 1941, Welty talked to Russell about the fact that she had to change the final song in Powerhouse. And I can't believe I hadn't quoted this before, and I'm trying to find a way to get it into print now, but here it is. She says about the Atlantic Monthly, "I warned them that any song coming at the end of the story ought to scare them, hold tight, or anything else. And so I wonder if they'll catch their brows when Powerhouse comes out with Somebody Loves Me, Maybe It's You. I like it that way. You wait and see," she said. So the choice for the shocking choice of Somebody Loves Me, the scary choice of Somebody Loves Me. And then in a letter from February 21st, 1941, she talked to Dermot Russell about Old Mr. Grenada and changing the story to Old Mr. Marblehall. And she said there was a father who was maybe past his prime that used to walk down her street with his young son, and she used to watch him going by, and she would speculate, what if he had a double life? But then she said she didn't base the story on him. It was just that prompted the thought. Then she found out that he was from Grenada, Mississippi, and she thought, oh no, I better change the title of that story. And by this time, his young son had become quite the devil himself. And so she thought, I got to change it. So she moved it to Natchez. And then she said she thought it had been a Natchez story all along. So a little bit about the history of Old Mr. Marblehall. Welty and Russell seem to have settled on the story order themselves, although John Woodburn, her editor at Doubleday, surely played a role in the story order. It does vary. The story order of the published book does vary from the order of the manuscript that Russell originally circulated, but Lily Dahl was always the first story. And A Memory and Powerhouse were, in that version, the last two. A Worn Path had not yet been written when that manuscript began to circulate. As she reworked the story order, or as they did in concert, Death of a Traveling Salesman was moved from its position as story number 4 to its position in dialogue with Powerhouse and A Worn Path at the end of the book. And A Memory was moved to the center of the book. So those changes that we might want to think about as we discuss the stories. Let's start, though, with A Worn Path, the story last written for the collection, written after The Robber Bridegroom in October 1940, accepted at the Atlantic along with Powerhouse in December 1940, sparked by the sight of an old woman walking across the horizon when Eudora Welty and her friend Helen J. Lauterhouse were out on the old Canton Road, which was then rural and not developed as it is today. And she saw an elderly woman, an African-American woman, walking across the horizon with determination, and thought that that would be the occasion for a story. That story occasioned much discussion among readers and especially among students who went on to study it as it became better and better known. And in fact, when I came here in 1985-86 for a year-long grant before I moved here, Eudora got an honorary degree from Queens College at the City University of New York. And she told me that when she went for her honorary degree, the president of the college, a woman, wanted to introduce her to her son. She said, "My son has been studying your stories in class." And the son came up and, "Oh, Miss Welty, I'm so glad to meet you," he said. "Is Phoenix Jackson's grandson really dead?" So that's after 1974, when she published an essay in Critical Inquiry called "Is Phoenix Jackson's Grandson Really Dead?" And we can talk about that, and I'll tell you what she said. If you haven't read the essay, I'll tell you what she said in the essay. So let's talk about the story. Where do you want to start? Do you want to start? We can talk about it as a story following a journey motif. We can start with, is Phoenix Jackson's grandson really dead? Or maybe we ought to save that for a little later. We can start by talking about Phoenix and her trials, the trials that she faces. Anyone want to start us off? Any place you'd like? No one wants to start? Harriet will start us, I bet. Is that what you're reaching? Are you reaching for the sound button there, Harriet? Yeah, go.
Okay. I was guessing that you were going to start with the description of Phoenix. Her skin had a pattern all of its own of numberless branching wrinkles, and as though a whole little tree stood in the middle of her forehead, but a golden color ran underneath, and the two knobs of her cheeks were illuminated by a yellow burning under the dark. And I've just been thinking about that tree and a wrinkled brow that is marked with age, but also with the psychic toll of having lived so long and seen so much, and then too the golden color that suggests maybe life force, maybe determination, maybe survival, but something.
Maybe the sun,
glowing.
Phoenix associated with the sun, the mythological Phoenix.
Yeah, oh, and with resurrection. Yeah. But yeah, so much for that.
All right, yeah. Gilbert, what do you think?
I was saying resurrection and fire as well. But I do love the story, and I thought it really gave a lot of dignity to Phoenix and these people struggling in their own personal journeys. I thought it was a lovely story. Thank you.
All right, yeah, so I've written about that passage. That's why Harriet thought I was going to start with that passage. I think I've written about that. And I associate her, with the world of nature, that she is a part of the natural world as opposed to the more urban world of Natchez. But not that the world of nature, being part of the world of nature, is an unmixed blessing, because nature can be very cruel as well. And she has seen that nature has taken its toll on her in terms of her physical abilities. But yeah, but the dignity that G. Bear says, I think, is really important. Yeah, Joe Ellen.
I'm not entirely sure what to do with this. Throughout our reading of A Curtain of Green, I've been noticing the roles played by processions of little boys, like in Death of a Traveling Salesman, interweaving around little boys in bright shirts. And on the second page, 172, Phoenix is described when she says, "Now comes the trial," as lifting her skirt, leveling her cane fiercely before her like a festival figure in some parade. And she began to march across. Then she opened her eyes and she was safe on the other side. The perspective there seems to be from outside Phoenix, calling her like a festival figure in some parade. But she is marching deliberately. And anyway, the role of kids throughout is just something I've noticed but not thought very much about.
I think that's really important, that it's a festival figure in some parade. And I think the journey is really important. And the motif of the journey as going out, typically, attaining some sort of saving knowledge and then returning with that saving knowledge. And she's pretty self-aware the whole time. She returns with the medicine. She's going to march back with the medicine, but also maybe with a greater self-awareness. I'm not going to forget him the whole enduring time. And so that the journey, as a kind of mythological journey, as a symbolic journey, I think the festival figure, representative figure in that. Yeah, Harriet.
Yeah, I'm thinking about I think about the story as she went on, which is a phrase in the story. That there is this journey that arrives moment by moment, and is filled with literal and figurative snares, and Phoenix negotiates its ordeals with a kind of in a way that suggests her awareness of her precarious position in this landscape. I was going to say too that, talking about nature, I mean, I think about this story as an anti-pastoral. Black writers don't write serene beauty of the natural world. They write about being in the woods and meeting white men with guns, yet Welty, I mean, if I compare Welty with Richard Wright doing the same kind of anti-pastoral, Welty's turns towards a kind of the promise of survival, the promise of going on, the promise of endurance and resurrection, so that's it's both nature is challenging in this woods.
I think nature is challenging. It's up the hill. That's a challenge. It's crossing that log bridge at 90 or so years of age and keeping your balance. It's getting past that thorny bush. But I think the real threat, of course, is not necessarily from nature, or maybe it is from nature, is from the white hunter first. And then in the town, we have to see how she negotiates the white people in the encounters with white people in the town, which are fraught as well. So yeah, so what about the hunter? Let's talk about that. He pulls her up, he lifts her up, he whirls her around. He's helped her, but then he chases the dog off, but then he comes back and he points the gun at her, a thing no hunter should ever do. He points a loaded gun at her. What do you make of that encounter and the way he speaks to her? Yeah, Joubert? We're not hearing you.
Muted.
Sorry, I hit the wrong button 2 times. To me, it just it gives us an illustration of the terror that African Americans have to live with when they do something like, as one of you was saying, encountering a white man in the woods. He could have just as easily as helped her as killed her, and for no reason other than he just might have felt like it. But I think it really shows at least in my mind, what I took away was the high hazard that African Americans have in just going about their daily lives in their encounters with
Now, this is
formerly
not the-
segregationist America, and now in our current world, it isn't over.
Yes. And so this is not the pastoral shepherd. This is a man who has bob whites in his bag with their beaks hooked cruelly to show that they're dead. And this is a man who thinks it's kind of funny to point a gun at someone. He wouldn't point it at an old white woman, but he will point it at her. Yeah, Joellen?
I just have to say, it has to come up here, parallels with Red Riding Hood, as well as other mythical figures. At least 3 times, the red rag on Phoenix's head is mentioned. We have a hunter, we have a wolf, she's Granny. And I'm not going to push that too far, and I really don't know whether anyone has. But big difference here is that the hunter figure or woodsman is a rescuing figure in that folk tale. And this one shows in the South, in the woods, shows someone very unpredictable indeed. He does help her get up, but his dog has knocked her down in the first place.
No, it's a different dog. It's a second dog.
Oh, that's right. That's right. So he sicks his dog after the first dog. So in that way, he's also protecting of her, but entirely unpredictable. And Phoenix endangers herself by bending over to pick up a nickel, which has dropped out of his pocket. So she knows how to play the odds, perhaps, in the woods.
Yeah, if you've ever been around anyone who is not very mobile, seeing someone bend over to pick up a nickel is a precarious thing for her to do. But she does it. It's the God watching me the whole time. He lies to her, though. He says, if I had any money, I assume he's lying, that I'd give you a dime. The money has fallen out. So he says he doesn't give her anything. I think also the fact that he calls her grandma several times, this is a mark of disrespect. She's not his grandmother. And later on, she's called Aunt Phoenix, another kind of term of disrespect. Yeah, Harriet.
Yeah, I'm thinking about the ways in which the woods have kind of set up this moment, where there have been, where the language of Phoenix's interiority, when she thinks, some feels like chains I got, what was, I'm trying to get that line. I don't know if I'll find it in my notes right here. But the that chain image seems like there's chains about my feet time I get this far. Or when she thinks about the big dead trees, like black men with one arm, as she passes through the cotton fields, that there's been kind of undercurrents of history of race in America in her interior responses to the natural world. And then there is the hunter, and he is, I'm thinking, he not only points a gun at her, he says, "Doesn't the gun scare you?" And she replies, "No, sir, I've seen plenty go off closer by in my day." and for less than what I'd done. And at that moment, Phoenix is holding utterly still. But she also says, I'm bound to go my way, although he's told her that she needs to go home,
No.
stay home, and nothing will happen to you, which is has in the context of this encounter, which kind of moves between his glibness and his condescension to her, and it's hijinks, but it's hazard, and she is if she does not surrender to his sending her home to be safe.
Yeah. And he knows she's made a tremendous journey. I mean, he's telling us how far it is. That's farther than I go. But he also says, I know what you old colored people, you just want some Santa Claus. So he underestimates her courage and her purpose here. Bill and then Joubert.
Yeah, I was struck by her relationship with nature versus his, and specifically the quail. You know,
Yeah.
on page 174, the quail were walking around like poets, seeming all dainty and unseen. Walk pretty, she said. This is the easy place. This the easy going. And then, of course, in his hunter's pouch, he's killed one of the quail.
Yeah.
You know, and then also, you know, he said, if I had any money, I'd give you a dime.
Yeah.
She had just gotten a nickel that he had dropped.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think one of the kind of ideas that a lot of black folk have is that white people lie to them just to lie. And here she has caught him in a lie, because he had a nickel in his pocket.
Yeah.
Right. And in some regards, I think that's what she's saying when she said, and for less than what I'd done. She stole a nickel from him, so to speak. You know, so just for nothing, black folk get killed.
Yeah.
So
She judges herself harshly.
Yeah.
She's doing what she needs to do, but she judges herself harshly. Yeah, Joubert and then Joe Ellen.
Just briefly, that same passage where she responds back to the gun, just again highlights the common and frequent danger that she's been under through her life. It's sort of a daily danger, not something that just happened one time during the war or something, but you know, it's just, you know, routine threat that they live under.
Yeah. Yeah. Joe Ellen.
I would just like to comment on how looking at a novel by William Golding called The Inheritors looks back to Phoenix Jackson for me. If I had to put money on it in a bet, I'd put money on it that he'd read this. But when I think about that, there are a couple of things that evoke that for me, but they're very similar processes. Neanderthals are trying to remember their way back to their home. And one of the truly important places is when they have to walk across a stream on a log, which Phoenix has to do. She also drinks from the stream. But so that's just a little thing. But on page 177, when she goes into the physician's office and she sees the gold seal framed in the gold frame, it matched the dream that was hung up in her head. And that's how the old one in Golding's Inheritors negotiates the safety of all of the people with him, because he remembers somehow in pictures, they're really pre-verbal, but remembers in pictures ancient ways of surviving. And we certainly see Phoenix as a survival figure. And whether you buy that or not, it really brought to my mind the extent to which I believe we as readers are supposed to leave this story, taking something with us about anything, fortitude, endurance.
Yeah, Monica, you go wherever you want to. Then I want to move us to the encounter in the doctor's office. That may be where you're going.
Well, it's once again, we've seen in other stories in this collection, dreams are a kind of protection. We see dreams here, and then in a couple of pages earlier, on 174, when she walks past the cabin, she says, I walking in their sleep. And then the next page, there's also, so on the bottom of 175, it says if she were doing this in her sleep. So throughout this story, which connects them to the other stories, is this dreams as a kind of protection. That I love this idea of remembering in pictures and dreams as a way of survival that Joellen just noted.
Well, I love that too. And then there's also the scene where she says, the little boy brings her in her dream vision a piece of cake. That would be acceptable, and then it's not there, so that she's going in and out of dreams here, and that movement between the dream world and the more realistic world that we see in so many of the stories. Yeah. What about the scene in the doctor's? Well, Harriet, you go wherever you want to go first.
I was just going to, before we get to to the doctor's office, I was just thinking about Welty's risk of interiority in creating this Black woman character, and the way in which there is. I was thinking about this in relationship to Monica's talking about that line, I walking in their sleep. The narrator has said, or we thought it was the narrator, like old women under a spell, sitting there when she's passing by some women, or when she's passing by cabins, and she thinks like old women. But then she said, "I walking in their sleep," referring to the old women that the narrator has pulled up. There's this mediation, kind of between an external narrator who's objective and Phoenix's interior voice. I just think she does a really good job with something that is risky for a white writer to do, and that is or want to do, because certainly it's not so often pulled off in her time period, so I'm just thinking about
It's the sort of thing Toni Morrison praises. Yeah. In Welty, yeah.
yeah.
All right, shall we talk about the scene in the doctor's office? What about what's going on here? Swallowing lie, by the way, it was happened to children, I don't know how often, but it happened because the lie came in little crystals that looked like candy. So if a child got to the lie, he might swallow it. And so this is not an unknown problem. Yeah. So what about the scene in the doctor's office? Bill, I thought I saw you about to say something.
Yeah, it seems like she had white coat syndrome, perhaps I'm the only one in this crowd that's had white coat syndrome, where everything floods away from me as I have to answer a doctor's question, but it seems like that was what was happening. And then, the thing that struck me too was I was too old at the surrender. I assume she's talking about the end of the Civil War.
She is, yeah.
Yeah. That's, just think about that, how long ago that was.
I'm trying to piece that together too. And I'm thinking maybe she's 15 and now this is 1940. Yep. So, so a 65 to 40, I mean.
Yep. Yeah, she's 100 years old. Oh, yeah. Well, she's 90 years old. Yeah.
So somewhere in there. Yeah. Joellen.
It strikes me that one of the most important things in the doctor's office is that she wakes up from that dream, from walking in her sleep, and she remembers why she is on the journey. She has forgotten. It takes the nurse asking, "He isn't dead, is he?" for a flicker and a flame of comprehension to come back to her. And she swears then that she'll never forget him again, etc. And with the windmill at the very end, This is what came to me to do. So she has a moment of inspiration as well that sets up her return trip.
And I'm going to hold it up in front of me, and it's going to be moving in the circular fashion, and she's living in terms of natural time, and the phoenix is reborn in a cycle of renewal. And her memory may be fallible, but her deep-seated, the deep-grained habit of love, as Welty calls it, is not lost. And so that's there the whole time. Yeah, Harriet.
I'm not going to let the clinic off without, talking about the attitude of the nurses
Good.
to and thinking about medicine and systemic racism and this you can feel Phoenix kind of knowing when to speak and when to stay silent and when to assert herself, that her interaction with the white individuals that she meets is kind of a mix of performance and vulnerability. And she is, we've seen this before in the Black women in Delta Wedding. But here it's medicine, and here it's this attendant that asks for the details of her grandson's health in a way that leaves her waiting silent, erect, and motionless, just as if she were in armor. And tell us quickly about your grandson and get it over.
You mustn't take up our time like this, the nurse says to her. You mustn't take up our time. Yeah. Spit it out. And then they say right in front of her, charity case. So it is demeaning. And that she is playing a role in part. Well, she knows who to ask to tie her shoes as well. What sort of person is likely to do it. Now, she may be displaying a kind of shrewd knowledge, but I think it's also that she's assessed the situation accurately. Who will help me? I don't want to fall down on those stairs. Yeah, Mary.
I just wanted to comment kind of along the same line that I was struck by. The doctor said, as long as you came to get it, you could have it, but it's an obstinate case, almost like he wasn't even going to give it to her. It's like she may, if she hadn't come, like his telephone, if she could have called, he wouldn't have given it to her. But the fact that she was there in person, that just really struck me. Like he wasn't even going to consider the little boy.
Yeah, and well, it's an obstinate case, but you can have it. It's like, well, why doesn't he go ahead and die in a way? So get through it. Yeah. Is Phoenix Jackson's grandson really dead? Harriet? You think he?
No, I haven't read that essay in a while. Obviously, it was very important to me at one point. But I am thinking about the words in the story. When she has this episode of disassociation, that Bill pointed out, that she's just out of herself. And nobody says, Phoenix, do you need help? Which isn't a medical establishment, but when she wakes up from it, she says, we is the only two left in the world. He suffer, and he don't seem to put him back at all. Got a sweet look. He gonna last. I remember so plain now. I'm not gonna forget him again. No, the whole enduring time. I'm thinking about her collapsing that scene to there are only two left in the world, me and my grandson. she remembers him and and excludes the other people in the clinic. And she's there because he is going to last. And she's going to help him to last. So no, I don't think Phoenix's grandson is dead.
And of course, in the essay, what Welty says is, I never thought of him as being dead. I thought of him as being alive, but it wouldn't matter if he were dead. What matters is that she makes the journey, and she makes it out of that well-worn habit of love. And the heroism is not diminished whether he's alive or dead. The heroism is the same, and the act of love is the same, and the regenerating effect of love, I think, a renewing effect of love. Bill?
I never even thought about him being dead until you said that somebody had asked her that question, which I think is actually, I don't know how anybody would read that he's dead out of this story. He's very much alive. And I should have noted earlier how she reclaimed her dignity in that office by taking those two charity nickels, putting them down next to each other and walking out. She's not a charity case. She took those nickels, paid for that medicine, and left. So not only is her grandson alive, but her dignity is very much alive.
Well, she doesn't leave the nickels there, though. She says, "I going to the store and buy my child a little windmill," they says, "made out of paper. A gift for him." That's why she's taking it. She's taking it for his sake. Yeah,
Did she take it? I didn't read that she took it. She fished the other nickel out of her pocket and laid it beside the new one.
She stared at her palm closely with her, so she's got them in her palm.
I guess so. I guess that's probably a better reading of it. Yeah.
I think that's what's happened. And she said, "I'm going to buy the windmill." And I've taken it, the windmill is, we all have had them, I think, as children, or at least my generation did. And so it blows around in circles. It suggests the natural way, like this is not the season for bulls this is the time she judges by the place of the sun and the sky, the natural movement of time, as opposed to the town's measuring of time.
Yeah.
In little
Oh, it's a
coffee.
good reading.
Yeah. Anyone else? Harriet?
Yeah, I've got one more thing to add, and that is thinking about what Welty is dealing with in the era when she's writing about race. You were reading the Russell letters. I was reading the Lyle letters, and I came across this. She writes, "Must report that Mr. Jovanovich, the new president of Harcourt, telephoned me from his desk to ask if some editors who wanted to use a warm path in a textbook could delete the word Negro from it, or else would I change the story and not call the character Aunt Phoenix, but Mrs. Jackson. And I said I wouldn't. Told him that I never meant disrespect in the first place and didn't think it was up to me to prove it by making changes. And if the textbook editors couldn't see the feeling of the story plain, they didn't know what the story was saying anyway. These are cautious times, but it really made me mad to imply that if I did mean disrespect, they could easily correct it for me by changing a few words. I just think it's interesting to understand the way in which it was difficult for her to write this fiction, and as a white woman writer.
Yeah. And of course, changing it to Mrs. Jackson, having the white hunter call her instead of grandma, call her Mrs. Jackson, let him right off the hook. And so, or the attendants, and say Mrs. Jackson instead of Aunt Phoenix, they're off the hook. Yeah. So the kind of wrong-headedness of Jovanovich there. Any last comments just on A Worn Path? If not, we'll talk about the order of the stories a little bit. I was going to ask 3 questions about the story order. One, why put these 3 stories? The first one she published, Death of a Traveling Salesman, then the last 2, Powerhouse and A Worn Path, at the close of the book. She ends with those 3. Why start with Lily Dahl? She always started with Lily Dahl. And why move a memory to the center? So those were the 3 questions I was going to ask us to think about in terms of story order. So do you want to start with the last 3 stories, putting them together here at the end, or the last 2 stories, Powerhouse and A Worn Path? Any suggestions? Why close the book at this way? Bill?
Well, you know, these are all told told from a perspective of a person that she couldn't possibly be. You know, we have an older white salesman going through the South. We have a jazz pianist playing in the South. We have an old Black woman walking in the South. And, you know, they seem like they're all here. Here's the range I have that I can write in, so to speak, to me. And they're very powerful. And I think A Curtain of Green, when she got stuck in that thorny bush, she says, old eyes thought you was a pretty little green bush, you know? So here's another curtain of green that she's surrounded one of her characters with, you know? So I don't know why writers choose the things they do or how they do it. I'm just glad they do, and they write about it, you know? But and then why she started out, Lily Dahl, I got to tell you, that was the first story I read by Eudora Welty, and I thought it was marvelous. And I thought, oh, this is going to be how they all are in this collection. Nope.
I think that you're making 2 really important points there. One is the variety, as she doesn't do the same thing over and over. A great variety of techniques, of varieties of characterization. The other thing is, I always love what Welty said about writing fiction. I never doubted, she said, that writing fiction is imagining yourself into lives not your own. It's not regurgitating your own experience. It's imagining yourself into lives not your own. And what a powerful thing that is, and what a gift it is to us to imagine ourselves into lives that are not our own, to identify with characters whose experiences are different from ours, and to break down those boundaries. So, yeah. And so here we've got the salesman, the very old woman, the Black jazz pianist, and she's transcending those boundaries. Yeah. Jo Ellen.
I think we've discussed how Powerhouse and The Worn Path move toward the possibility of transformation. And I think her moving toward the end, after she'd written The Worn Path, in fact, moving Death of a Traveling Salesman down there is a kind of circling back for her. We have plenty of stories in the meantime that are about entrapment and even violence and that kind of thing. But with Death of a Traveling Salesman, we have a story where a man's car is in the beginning, falls into a ravine where it's held, or immense grapevines rock it like a grotesque child in a dark cradle. And we go through his experience where he has a vision of possible life, and the fact that he has completely misinterpreted people who turn out to be a fertile couple who are going to be having a baby and have love, and he runs away from it. But then in Powerhouse, we have a white audience watching Powerhouse, but we have an even stronger model of imaginative possibility. And then with A Worn Path, a figure, an enduring figure, struggling along with it on her own. Anyway, I really like that last cluster.
Yeah, I agree with all of that, and I think, here he's failed to see in the ordinary that the ordinary can also be mysterious and miraculous and fulfilling. And then there's Powerhouse reaching out to his audience. Somebody loves me, the artist reaching out, and maybe it's you. And you have a sense that maybe there is the person who's narrating that story has made the connection that he thinks is impossible. Maybe it's you.
Mhm.
And then Phoenix act of love here at the end. Yeah, Monica.
I
I
like
meant,
your,
oh,
go ahead.
I just meant to say it's very distinct from the first story, Lily Daw, where we have that hope chest going off on the train. So we're ending in a more positive fashion, I think. Yeah, go ahead.
I like that your use of the phrase the mysteriousness of the ordinary, because I flipped back to Lily Daw, and the opening of Lily Daw is in the post office and a letter coming into town. And it seems like there's a motif in a lot of these stories of the post office, the doctor's office, the newspaper, like all of these institutions of civilization, and how we negotiate just what you said, the mysteries of the ordinary in all of these places, like the PO, the Ellisville Institute. How there's like some thread that's going through about our interactions with these institutions.
Harriet.
Reading, I've been struck both by the variety that we've talked about, but it is astonishing because their stories are so different. And also by the way in which these stories tend, more than I realized before, have little details in them that tie them together, that she's doing repetitions that when we read them in sequence stand out. But I didn't think, I remembered that you were going to ask us about the order and what ties things together a little late today, but I did come up with one thought, and that is secret lives and public exposures. Going back to Lily Daw, there is both a sense of the individual life of Lily and also her being watched by the three ladies. I think that all of the stories have some kind of tension between secret lives and public exposures that are played differently. Maybe sometimes we want more emphasis on the secret life and sometimes more emphasis on the exposures. But I'm thinking about Lily Daw and Ruby and Mr. Petrie and the Morgans and Keela and Tom Harris and the Hitchhikers and the Girl in a Memory, as much as the bathers that she watches, Clady, Mr. Marplehall, obviously, Mrs. Larkin, being seen from above, the women in A Visit to Charity, being observed by the girls, the striper, Bowman in Traveling Salesman, Powerhouse is White Audience, Phoenix, and the
I love that idea. I think you need to write it up. Write that up.
okay.
Because there's nothing written about this. And I think it also, what you're saying, points to why a memory belongs at the center of the collection.
Right.
That's the key to
that gesture of exposure of the woman exposing herself, so disturbing. The girl who will remember it, having being in a different position by the end of her life, or by the later moment in her life when she can expose herself by telling the story and just take that risk and to let us judge her in her memory.
Bill.
I don't want to take up all the time, but I had to read these all the stories I hadn't read up to this point, so I read The Key, and it got me curious as to whether or not Eudora Welty knew American Sign Language. And when I Googled that, I found, in fact, a very short film had been made of The Key, and the only language in it is American Sign Language. I don't know how you could really follow the story or understand the depth of it the actual movie without having read the story, but it was enjoyable in its own right too. So it's about 25 minutes long, I think.
It's a good film, I think, yeah.
I liked it. I did, and it's all not all the actors, but it's acted by deaf actors.
Right.
So yeah,
I think it's the American Theater for the Deaf. I'm not sure.
yes, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, Laura.
This conversation is just making me think again about the title of the collection. And unfortunately, I missed the discussion of A Curtain of Green. So I don't
I
know
have
if
a
it's
little
already
bit to
been
say
touched.
about that. I forgot to say it. Go ahead. Let's talk about
I was going to ask if that was, you'd mentioned that Lily Daw was always the beginning story. Was The Curtain of Green always, was that the idea? But then I was also thinking about the idea of what Harriet said, and this idea of exposure and that sort of the curtain that opens and closes.
Well, what happened was it was just sent out at first under the title Stories. And then when they had a book, when the book was accepted, they had to decide on the title. And Welty and Russell, her agent, thought The Key, Another Story. They wanted to call it after one of the stories. They thought The Key and Other Stories would be a good title. But the people at Doubleday, including John Woodburn, weren't crazy about The Key. And so they played with other titles, and the one everyone finally agreed they would accept was A Curtain of Green. And I think the key, both The Key and A Curtain of Green would fit the kind of thing Harriet is outlining. So that's how they came to that title, by the process of elimination. But yeah, the whole idea of the curtain, the whole idea of there being a key somewhere behind here, there is the inner life, the key, perhaps suggested there. I should mention, of course, I think we did earlier, that the first good essay about Eudora Welty was written by Robert Penn Warren, and it was called The Love and the Separateness in Miss Welty. And in a way, it shaped the way people thought about the stories ever after, for long years and years. And I think it's a very apt observation that he takes the phrase from first love, but it does suggest the kind of concern that permeates these stories. But I think there are other ways of looking at that might open up the collection for us in new ways. And I like the idea of public exposure and inner, what did you say? Inner what, Harriet? The inner life, the private life and public exposure. The
Well,
inner
secret lives, because I was thinking about
yeah.
old Mr. Marblehall, the whole idea of, you know, what characters know inside themselves versus how they're seen.
Yeah. I was struck this time in reading it, and we don't have time to talk about it, but how the sequence of the stories, one story informed my reading of the next. And I thought that was something I hadn't paid much attention to before. And I had already sort of grouped the stories. Here are the stories about the Great Depression. Here are the stories about race. Here are the comic stories. But here are two stories about a salesman. But instead, reading them in this order was much more illuminating to me than the order I had imposed on them in my teaching. Yeah, Jo Ellen?
I really like that, Suzanne, because I think that processions, which we've mentioned every now and then, are extremely important in Welty. So she creates a kind of procession here. Now, I was thinking
about it in One Writer's Beginnings too, the procession.
Yes, yes. And I was thinking about what, along the lines of what Harriet said, in a little different direction, because I've been trying to imagine Welty in her late 20s, establishing herself as an artist. And we certainly have talked about stories that help show how she wants to exercise imagination in herself and the reader. But thinking of her generation, especially Southern women, and obstructionism, and the fact that they had to be a little bit crafty. They couldn't necessarily put in print what they could think in private, put out to the public what they could say as private. So their achievement as women artists had that extra spin on it. They were sort of new women, but they had to be a little bit deceptive in their surfaces, I think, and as a kind of defensive posture. But by the end of this book, we have Welty as a much more confident writer and artist, and even going out on farther limbs.
Right. Like going out there with Locke Morrison on the limb. And of course, the other thing I would like us to think about in terms of connecting the stories is the emphasis on the imagination, and especially upon shared acts of imagination. In a piece of news, for instance, in a whistle, in Powerhouse, that the imagination, the use of the imagination is a powerful way of connecting us to each other, and the importance of the imagination. So the importance of memory, we might also say, running through here. The treasure, she says in One Writer's Beginnings, the treasure most dearly regarded. Well, I hate to end our discussion of A Curtain of Green. I loved it, but I think I'm going to turn over. Jessica wants to give us the last word here. So I'm going to stop right now and turn it over to Jessica.
Well, thank you, Suzanne, and thanks to all of you. We have reached the end of our series on A Curtain of Green, and there were a lot of people that went into making that possible. So I wanted to just do a formal closing and, of course, a tease of our next pick. So from me to you, and from the Eudora Welty House and Garden to you, thank you for being part of this discussion and all your wonderful comments. That's what makes it what it is. Thanks to Suzanne Mars and Harriet Pollock, the Mississippi Department of Archives and History, and the Eudora Welty Foundation for making this program possible and free for everybody to attend. So a tradition by now is that we like to share our next book club pick at the end of every session. And as you know, with Welty at Home, we alternate works by Welty with works by authors connected to Welty. So we've just had a session on Welty, and next we're going to take a connected author and look at their work. We are going to take a break before we do this. So we haven't come up with a reading schedule yet. Don't worry, it will come. Our March and April is very busy at our site. So come visit us in person during that season. But as soon as we can, we'll at least release a schedule. But today I can tell you the book, and the name of that book is going to be A Room with a View by E.M. Forster. We will be reading and referencing the Penguin Classics paperback edition, but any text will do. And we're so excited to do a deep dive into all the wonderful connections between Welty and Forster. There are many, but if you come to the Welty House, of course, you will get to see a framed letter by E.M. Forster. So maybe some of you have seen that. If you haven't, put it on your list to try to see in person. It's a special thing, and we'll talk a lot more about that in our next series. If you signed up to receive Welty at Home emails, you will automatically receive updates for the next series, so you don't have to do anything. A reading schedule, like I said, and dates will be announced in the coming weeks, but just sit back. And meanwhile, you can follow our social media at Eudora Welty House on Facebook and Instagram. You can visit EudoraWeltyHouse.com, or you can look and wait for your inbox for any Welty at Home book club updates. So with that, thank you. See you next time, and a big round of applause for Suzanne Mars.
I was going to say we'll have a big round of applause for Jessica Russell, who makes all these arrangements and who guides us during the session. So thank you, Jessica.
Thanks to all for being here. I love it, and we'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.